Everyone thought the quiet nurse with the tired eyes was just another underpaid caregiver. Until three armed men kicked open the hospital doors, and she became the last person they ever wanted to meet. The fluorescent lights in Ward C hummed there. Monotonous tune as Sarah Mitchell checked the 4-drip on bed 7, her movements practiced and gentle. She'd been working the night shift at Memorial Hospital for 3 years now, and most people saw exactly what she wanted them to see. A soft-spoken woman in scrubs, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, moving through the halls with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible. What they didn't see were the scars that ran across her shoulders beneath the thin fabric, or the way her eyes constantly mapped exits and threat vectors even while she smiled at patients. What they couldn't have known was that before she became Sarah Mitchell, RN, she'd been Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, 75th Ranger Regiment, with 2 tours in Afghanistan and a drawer full of commendations she never talked about. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening to this story. It was 2:47 a.m. when the hospital's automatic doors exploded inward. 3 men in dark clothing stormed through the emergency entrance, weapons raised, voices sharp with demands that echoed down the sterile corridors. The lead gunman, tall with wild eyes and shaking hands, shouted something about a patient, about justice, about revenge. Sarah was in the supply closet when she heard the first screams. Her hand, reaching for gauze, froze in midair. That sound, that particular pitch of human terror, it was a frequency she'd hoped never to hear again. A sound that belonged to dusty villages halfway around the world. Not to a quiet suburb of Cedar Falls, but muscle memory doesn't forget. And training doesn't fade just because you hang up the uniform. She moved to the doorway, staying in shadow, and assessed the situation with the cold clarity that had kept her alive through 17 combat engagements. 3 hostiles, semi-automatic, weapons, unclear objectives. The hospital's security guard, Tom Sweet Tom, with his grandkid photos and terrible coffee lay motionless near the reception desk. 12 patients on this floor, most of them elderly or post-surgical, vulnerable, immobile. The elevator dinged somewhere in the distance, and Sarah's blood ran cold. The night shift supervisor, Jenny, would be coming up with medication refills, walking straight into an ambush. Sarah's hand dropped to her side, fingers curling and uncurling. An old habit from when they'd held something very different than a blood pressure cuff. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who joined the army to pay for college, to escape a small town, to prove something to a father who'd never believed in her. She thought about the soldier she'd become, the one who had carried wounded. Teammates under fire, who'd made decisions in split seconds that meant life or death. She'd left that person behind when the nightmares got too heavy. And the therapy sessions started outnumbering the good days. She thought she'd never need to be here again. She was wrong. The lead gunman was moving toward the patient's rooms now, his weapon sweeping in erratic arcs. Where is he? He screamed. Where's the man who killed my brother? Behind him, his accomplices fanned out, and Sarah recognized the amateur chaos of rage without training, danger without discipline. These weren't professionals. They were hurt, angry men with guns, which somehow made them more unpredictable, more lethal. Sarah stepped into the hallway. She called out, her voice steady, calm, almost bored. The kind of voice that didn't shake even when mortar rounds were shaking the earth. All 3 men spun toward her, weapons rising, and she raised her empty hands slowly. You don't want to do this. Whatever you're looking for, whatever happened, this isn't the answer. The lead gunman laughed, a bitter sound that cracked at the edges. You don't know anything about what I want, lady. Get back in your closet before you get hurt. But Sarah was already moving, her feet carrying her forward in small, non-threatening steps, her eyes locked on his. She'd talked down terrified soldiers, negotiated with village elders, stared down insurgents across contested checkpoints. She knew how to read the micro-expressions that betrayed intent, the shoulder tension that preceded violence, the eye movements that signaled decisions being made. I know you're scared, she said softly. I know you're angry. I know you think this is the only way to make someone pay attention, to make someone hurt the way you're hurting. You don't know anything. He shouted, but his weapon lowered slightly, and Sarah saw the opening she needed. What happened next unfolded in the space between heartbeats. The gunman's finger twitched toward the trigger just as Mrs. Henderson in room 12 suite Mrs. Henderson, who reminded Sarah of her grandmother, called out in confusion. The barrel swung toward that elderly voice, and Sarah's body moved before conscious thought could intervene. 3 years of peace shattered as 8 years of training erupted from wherever she'd buried it. She closed the distance in 4 strides, her hand striking the weapon's slide with practiced precision, her hip checking into his center of gravity, her other arm coming up under his chin. The weapon discharged, the bullet punching harmlessly into acoustic ceiling tiles as Sarah twisted, using his own momentum to drive him into the wall. The crack of his head against painted cinder block echoed like a punctuation mark. He dropped, unconscious, before he hit the linoleum dot. The other 2 gunmen barely had time to process what they'd witnessed. Sarah had already scooped up the fallen weapon, cleared it, and leveled it with the kind of casual competence that comes from doing something 10,000 times. "Don't," she said simply, and something in her eyes, something cold and ancient, and utterly certain, made them freeze. These weren't the hands of a nurse anymore. These were the hands of someone who'd held a line against impossible odds, who'd learned that sometimes violence was the only language that prevented greater violence. "On the ground," she ordered, her voice carrying the ring of absolute authority. Now, they complied, and the silence that followed was broken only by Mrs. Henderson's confused questions, and the distant wail of sirens finally approaching. Jenny appeared from the elevator, her scream dying in her throat as she took in the impossible scene. Gentle Sarah standing over 3 subdued men, holding a weapon with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been born, knowing how to use it. The police arrived 7 minutes later to find Sarah had already secured all 3 men, with 4 tubing. Checked Tom's pulse. He was alive, just unconscious, and returned to checking on her patients as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The lead officer, a veteran himself, took one look at the scene, at the way she'd positioned the men, at the cleared weapon resting on the nurse's station, and knew immediately what he was seeing. Military? He asked quietly. Sarah met his eyes, and for just a moment let him see past the tired nurse to the soldier beneath. Used to be. What unit? Rangers. He nodded slowly, respect filling his expression. "Thank you for your service." Both of them. The story spread through the hospital like wildfire, then through the town, then across the internet where stories of quiet heroism always seemed to find their wings. Sarah gave no interviews, made no statements, just returned to her shift the following night as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. Her colleagues looked at her differently now, with a mixture of awe and understanding. They saw the scars differently, understood the quietness differently, recognized that healing comes in many forms, and the strongest among us are often those who choose gentleness after knowing violence. Mrs. Henderson baked her cookies every week. After that, always chocolate chip, always delivered with a trembling hand and wet eyes. Tom recovered fully and never walked his rounds without thinking about the woman who'd saved his life. And on Ward C, beneath the humming fluorescent lights, Sarah continued her work-checking IBS, adjusting pillows, holding hands in the dark, hours before dawn, carrying both versions of herself with equal grace, because strength isn't about choosing violence or peace. It's about knowing when each is necessary, and having the courage to be exactly who your moment demands. The night. Nurse, with the tired eyes, continued her rounds. Still underpaid, still underestimated, still watching the doors. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment about a time someone surprised you with unexpected courage. These stories matter because they remind us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scrubs. I'll see you in the next one.